Hello, my lovelies! I'm Jenny O, the author with no last name, and this is Jenny O Talks, the part of the channel where I talk about things in the bookish community. And today I want to talk about Christian literature, as in, what is up with Christian literature? Why is it so unbearably toxic? We all kind of like to pick on Christian literature, calling it bad and toxic and, well, rather sanctimonious in the worst way possible. Works like Tolkien's and Lewis's tend to be exempt from this mocking, whereas works from the more recent Christian literature of the 80s and onwards are open season. Stephen R. Lawhead being exempt because he had moved to Tor in order to get the rest of his books published. And there is a lot of questions running around about why is Christian literature the way it is? Fear not, my lovelies, I actually have some answers. A quick background from my authority about this. I grew up Protestant evangelical Christian in a small town and went to another small town's church since the only church in town was Anglican and we aren't that Catholic ripoff. Catholics are bad, y'all. In second grade, my parents sent me to a Christian Baptist school. In third, I moved to a Lutheran school, and by junior high, I was on my third, and yet again, Baptist school. By middle school, my mother was also the church librarian, and as far as I can remember, we've always had the Christian book distributor catalog in the house. I read Mandy, which was the Christian historical Nancy Drew for middle grade or children's. Then being precocious by third grade, I had jumped to authors like Lori Rick, Janet Oak, Jane Pert, Gilbert Morris, Francine Rivers, and Frank Peretti. Thankfully, I also had a love of Brian Jacques Redwall, and by 7th grade discovered Star Wars. And I noticed around 8th or 9th grade that Christian literature writers weren't doing it for me anymore, and jumped ship to spend hundreds of dollars on the Star Wars EU and science fiction and fantasy books like Mercedes Lackey. I got out just before the Amish romance craze. Yes, I did watch VeggieTales in college because VeggieTales is cute and in general inoffensive, okay? It's for 4-year-olds. It's hard to be offensive when your audience is 4-year-olds. So I have been there, buried in the trenches of Protestant evangelical culture and listening to their music, reading their books, and being absolutely baffled by the big Christian bookstores and all the weird out-of-context Bible verse merch they sell. I have listened to Christian ska, which is punk with trumpets, okay? And given my entry album to Five Iron Frenzy was proof the youths are revolting with the pants rock opera at the end, there was a reason it wasn't being played on Focus on the Family-controlled radio. They didn't want rebelling youth. Oh yes, I do know about James Dobson and Focus on the Family. I had the girl magazine Brio they put out. Oh man, was it a trip. We had World Magazine too, not put out by Focus on the Family, but endorsed by it, before the circulation got so bad they cancelled it. We also subscribed to Ken Ham's Creation magazine, which had articles like, we tried to track the 12 or 13 grandsons of Noah to explain all the different people/cultures of the world. I am being very specific to Protestant evangelicalism here, and not Christianity in a broad term, because Protestant evangelicalism, whether we like it or not, formed the school system before we had the Department of Education and government, and they control most, if not all, the Christian publishing houses. The first thing you really have to understand about Protestant evangelical culture is the culture they've built around absolutism and how they apply it to everything. Purity, abortion, women's health, guns, politics, education, our healthcare system, and well, media such as books and movies. If I went into the contradictory beliefs of different evangelical Protestant denominations, we would be here all day, and your mind would be absolutely broken by the hypocrisy and outright blatant contradictory nature of some of the beliefs. I want to say my last Christian school was more balanced, but I don't really think it was in some cases. I mean, the year after I graduated, they did let the girls start wearing khaki pants to school instead of ankle-length skirts, so that was rather nice of them. So what do I mean by a culture of absolutism? Okay, I don't know if you have kids or if someone you remember being a kid, or maybe you have nieces or nephews or cousins that they are somewhere in the 7 to 11-year-old range. And they will latch onto messages like, smoking is bad, and from there they extrapolate that smokers are therefore bad people. In order to become good people, they need to stop smoking. Stop smoking because I love you and I want you to be around for a very long time. Yes, this is a real example from my own nephews. Their world is very black and white. Murder is bad no matter the reason. Murder includes abortion. Divorce is bad no matter the reason. You'd think they insert rape is bad in there, but yeah, I'm still waiting on that one. Sex is bad unless you're having sex with your spouse. Then it's good, which is just confusing to the absolutist mindset. Questioning is bad. If someone in authority says something, you are to trust them because they are in authority for a reason. God put them there, so what they are doing is good, even if it's invading Iraq, or the genocide of the Palestinians, or even though daddy hits mommy, she can't divorce him because that's bad, the pastor says so. And the only reason daddy won't hit mommy is because the pastor has told him not to. Don't ask questions. Mommy knows best. Even if mommy is belittling you and putting you down every other sentence, the absolutist mindset will justify about any type of abuse because often to the absolutist mindset, there is no such thing as verbal or emotional or social abuse. You had it coming. Obviously, you were wrong. They were just joking and you're too sensitive. Kids of this age are very trusting. They aren't working out right and wrong quite on their own yet. If bad things are presented to them in a good way, then they'll do the bad things. If good things are presented to them in a bad way, they won't do the good things. And they rely on their media, spelling things out to them blatantly. This is a good guy, this is a bad guy, and here is why. In the normal course of things, most people grow out of this stage. They start to question. They start seeing things aren't all black and white like this. They can make leaps from the literal to the moral and metaphysical without having their hand held. They can see beyond what is in front of their nose, apply critical thinking and reasoning, and go, okay, maybe this isn't as absolutist as I thought it was. Now, imagine an entire culture built around good versus evil, black versus white. There are no shades of gray in between, and you better trust your pastor. Your pastor, your Sunday school teacher, your teacher at school, your parents are always right. You must honor and obey their authority, even when they don't honor or respect your humanity. And if anyone presents to you information otherwise that your pastor or teacher at school doesn't approve of because it's progressive, liberal, or for the social good, aka socialism, it's wrong, and even things like science, it needs to be attacked and struck down, even when and if this actually goes against Judaic beliefs and practices or the teachings of Christ. Not that most Christians know how Jews practice their religion, they'd be shocked and appalled and consider it blasphemous. Now, take that standard and apply it to the rules of a publishing house so your Christian book can be produced and sold to the masses. Good must always be portrayed as good. Evil must always be portrayed as evil. Pastors and priests must always be good. There always has to be a moral, and dear God, let's take as many verses as possible out of context and smash them into the book. That alone was one of the huge reasons I stopped reading. Not only were they taking verses out of context, it was always the same verses trying to tell teenage girls and wives it was okay to love your husband and enjoy sex with him, even if the husband was an overbearing, verbally and emotionally abusive bastard. Because the Protestant evangelical Christian culture is also hugely patriarchal. And there aren't a ton of fiction books written for men in this culture either. Like, men are supposed to read nonfiction things, I guess, or they can read secular books because they're better at thinking things through than women. I don't know. I mean, I know there are some books aimed at boys. There's the Christian version of Party Boys, I think. The market is mostly Christian women who are encouraged to be stay-at-home moms because the integrity of the biblical marriage and family and teenage girls. That only really came about in the 1950s, so, girls and women, the people who it's acceptable to actually read. I mean, unless you're a pastor, you can't be caught reading if you're a man outside of the Bible. So therefore, the literature being pumped out by Protestant Christian publishing houses never and will never, as long as they have those rules, get beyond a middle grade level of reading. This, by the way, really did a number on my brain for many years. Try to imagine going from this to reading Anne McCaffrey's Pern. You just accept this abusive system is right, and okay, because Anne presented it as right, and okay, and it took a long time for me to go, oh, wait, what Fenora did to Breck was actually rape. Same with Valar and Lissa, and oh wow, all the abuse. How did this get published again? Christian literature is stuck at secular middle grade levels. Books they are writing for the teen and adult audience are written down to where a 7 to 11-year-old can understand them. I'm not going to say some of these books aren't well researched, because some of them are. I'm not going to say some of these books don't have entertaining storylines, because some of them really do. I mean, one of my favorites was a Lori Rick book in her Californian series, where the school teacher ended up married to the doctor because the appearances of propriety were more important than propriety itself. And he was tall and she was short, and he ended up moving cupboards down for her, and it was the really sweetest thing ever. Look, I'm short. Stop putting the top covers where I can't reach them. And that was one of the few books where the love interest wasn't a complete arse. I mean, he was actually kind, respectful, and went out of his way to make his new wife comfortable and look after her health. But you also have to deal with the morals like, Daddy is always right. The particular book with this moral was disturbing, and I don't think the author intended it to be as disturbing as it was. The main character's sister rebelled against her father and ended up being abused physically, verbally, and no doubt sexually, and her sister had to rescue her with the help of a good man. And yeah, well, it was a bit extreme. Go against your father and be punished. Oh boy. And Peretti's two books about spiritual warfare, where the moral really was drunkenness and drug addiction and nightmares, were all created by demonic influence, and if you became saved and got rid of the demons, those problems would go away. The underlying issues were never really addressed that caused the addictions in the first place. And if you're going, holy crap, that's bad, well, welcome to Christian horror literature. The moral is more horrifying than the book itself. There was the science fiction book, which had some really great ideas, but the moral was, eating meat is bad. It was buried, but it was there. And most of the romance books devolved down to, there is the right man for you, and you must save yourself for him because God said so. Even when these marriages were coming about by matters of circumstance and the society of love was nowhere to be seen, oh yes, this arranged marriage means this man she's never met is the right one for her and she needs to love him. I'm glad it worked out in this book, but it usually didn't in history. The 20th century morals being applied retroactively to 15th and 16th century society, or worse, Roman society, is always interesting. I guess that's a word for it. I mean, these are the Christian equivalent of Harlequin romance novels without sex, and most of the time, even without kissing. Vanilla of vanilla. Now, Paul writes to the Corinthians about how he has given them milk, aka easy teachings at first because they couldn't bear meat, or harder teachings. And basically, he's going, so at some point you had to grow up and start really looking hard at things and applying your brains. Remember, Paul was a Pharisee, someone who was extremely legalistic and moral absolutist before his conversion, and after his conversion, he fled to Gaul and decided to study the Torah more and other writings before returning to Israel and that whole area, where because of his education and his authority in the Jewish tradition, he became a mentor to many of the churches. And the only reasons his letters are part of the Bible is because there are so many copies of them made and spread around that we're fairly certain the letters are accurate. Versus the Book of Revelation by John of Patmos is one of those things I shake my head at because John of Patmos' prophecies haven't come true and we aren't supposed to believe them unless they do. So I guess we just had to save the end time stuff for the Christians win and inspire a really bad set of novels by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins out of Tinsdale House. The one that does Bibles and has a new YA imprint with a new Wander imprint in the anti-homosexual something or other dystopian. I had to change my name to try and get a broader secular audience author scandal. You know, that is not actually the first time Christian authors have done this. This time the woman got caught by having 2 social media presences with, honest to God, the same photos and author bio about feeling called by God to write this book to spread the good news, aka the love of Jesus. Protestant evangelical thinking. Okay, when you feel called by God to do something, that is also absolutism right there. If someone tries to call you out and say, your book is wrong and gives bad messages, you can't be wrong or bad because God told you to do it. And so you aren't responsible for anyone's hurt feelings or invalidated identity because they are wrong simply because they're telling you what God told you to do was wrong. God is right, you are right, they are wrong, period. It's a huge argument. I was called by God to do this, or go be a missionary, or whenever they need an excuse to justify harmful behavior. It's like the trump card of, oh, well, God said so, so there, and you can't argue with it. Don't even bother to try. Jesus was not someone who was moral absolutist in the way modern evangelical Protestants, or even the way Sadducees and the Pharisees of the time were. He was considered a heretical Jewish rabbi, and there were a lot of little rabbis like him running around at the time. He managed to gain a following, and it made him more dangerous in the eyes of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Because he respected women and sat down with thieves and beggars, I mean, it was not that hard of a deal. Love everybody. Come on. What Christian literature books and what many pastors preach from the pulpit with their out-of-context verses are the equivalent of milk. You don't chew it, you don't have to think about it, it's easily digested and easy to understand. Even when it's wrong, toxic, and reprehensible, and completely contradicts Christ's teachings. I'm not going to say Paul's teachings because while Paul said some good things, most of the things Paul said are being radically taken and twisted by the evangelical Protestant church. I'm not going to say the stories of the Old Testament, because the Old Testament we have is pretty non-judgmental about its presentation of what went on, because it's more of a history and a law book than a commentary. It's the church that gets all judgy and labels people, like the books of the Bad Women of the Bible, which were really cool books because it broke down how awesome these women were to exploit their culture at the time to get what they needed, even though they shouldn't have had to do this if the men were actually fulfilling their obligations. Christian literature is at the state it is in because it refuses to allow for nuance. It refuses to go beyond middle grade reading levels and treat young adults and adults at the ages and stages of life they actually are at. So you have an entire group of people who have their worldview spoon-fed to them in the easiest form possible so they don't have to think and don't want to think about how they could be wrong. Which somewhere the Bible has something to say about that. It's pretty thorough on how it's against that type of thing. I mean, a key part of Judaism is questioning and arguing with God. I mean, Abraham didn't argue with God about saving Sodom and Gomorrah because he trusted God was always right to murder 2 cities with hundreds or thousands of people. He could have got down to one person in the cities and gotten God to save them. I'm not sure if there was a moral in the fact he didn't. I'm not Abraham. I don't know what's going on in his head, and the Bible doesn't tell us. It wasn't like with Noah, where God went, I'm going to do this thing, build a boat. Like, Noah wasn't given much choice to question or argue right then. He had to spend 100 years building a boat. Now, there are people who have never been in this subculture or exposed to these books who are also absolutists. Some people have brains that never actually get beyond that stage. And it's not a bad thing. It is something they need to be aware of because it does affect how they view fiction versus reality. To them, fiction and reality are very close, and they can't comprehend how a mind that has a larger separation of fiction from reality thinks. That just goes to show there is no one normal brain, and that's okay. However, we are talking here specifically about the Protestant evangelical Christian fiction and the absolutist culture it comes from. In order to maintain control of their people in the pews, they need their literature to also be as absolutist and easy to understand so their members aren't forced to think and maybe think, oh, the church isn't really that great in its modern reincarnation, and then leave, which means they lose numbers and money. If you think I'm being cynical about this, I have good reason. There are books out there that are written by Christians, but they aren't considered Christian enough by Christian publishers because they don't follow the rules of Christian publishing. Whether or not those Christian indie books are any better written than Christian trad books is really up for debate. My Heathens books, despite the fact Savannah and Gideon are both nominally Christian and go to church, and even Bran goes to Sunday church, even though he doesn't believe, wouldn't be considered Christian enough because I don't follow the rules. I don't put in bad guys and good guys. The heathens aren't expressly bad guys, but they aren't good guys either. They are heathens. They're alright guys. You root for them because they are the protagonists. But Savannah does some questionable things because she can get away with it. She has a barbarian's mood, and there is no reasoning with her afterwards. I had Padre quote most of a chapter of Thessalonians because I refused to take shit out of context. I was approving a point here, I'll admit that one. Padre was one of the founding members of Heaven Has Mercy and has done his fair share of killing during rescues. I don't think Christian publishers would appreciate the pastor being someone who doesn't chide the organization about all the killing they do during jobs. The 2 Cents Gang isn't supposed to be the morally evil people. They're a group trying to protect their neighborhood and get out of poverty and going about it the wrong way. The families are, well, okay, less ambiguous, but I haven't delved into it yet. The rebels are, in general, misguided and young. The heathens can't save the world, so they don't try. Other people have to figure out their own way. The heathens will help with money and services when they can, if they're asked. They can't do anything if they don't know someone or another community organization needs the help. So then you have things like Serpent Smile happening. I have far too much nuance. And a pair of leaders who aren't married and no intention of ever getting married. I also don't consider my heathens books Christians, because the narrative doesn't revolve around Christianity in the way Protestant evangelicals try to indoctrinate you into believing the way you're supposed to follow Christianity, which is you go to church 2 or 3 times a week, read your Bible every day, listen to Christian music, read Christian books, get your news from Focus on the Family or now Fox, and pray without ceasing. Don't ask me how that one works. I have other things to think about than praying to God all the time or reading the Bible over and over. Are my books actually any good? I don't know. That's so subjective to be meaningless. I'm just using them as an example of a book with Christianity in it that wouldn't be considered Christian. Stephen R. Lawhead, being published by Tor, can write Christian-themed things without having to follow the rules of Christian publishing. Therefore, his books do have more nuance and more violence, and at times can be a bit of a slog. Or I find them a bit of a slog. It took me twice to get through the Song of Albion trilogy, and I never did finish the Pendragon series. Not my cup of cocoa. Christian literature books put out by Protestant Christian publishing houses are deliberately written in a way that to modern audiences over the age of 12, specifically secular audiences, find them and their messaging toxic, preachy, and underwhelmingly, I know, not a word, written. They're writing to an audience they have created with their publishing house rules and absolutist culture, and are utterly baffled as when they try to get their books mainstream as to why broader audiences don't get, or find their books to be bad in both target market writing and messages. They do not understand why secular audiences don't want to hear their good news. Because your good news isn't entertaining? No one likes being preached at? Not even 7-year-olds? There is a piece of advice that a book about something is always a disaster. James Missioner. And I probably said that wrong. And so many times, Christian books are more about their themes than about their actual story, which is the huge issue in a nutshell. The moral is the book. And writers like Lewis and Tolkien didn't come up with their moral or theme first. They wrote stories, allegories. What if Jesus came to a different parallel universe? And so their books were entertaining and rich and do reach secular audiences. They wouldn't be published by Christian publishing houses today, which could be a good thing. Tolkien and Lewis, being university men, might have some things to say about the state of Christian publishing or Christian literature, and I doubt it'd be good. I think it's time to wrap this up. Maybe you knew this information already. Maybe you didn't. I hope you found it entertaining either way. Feel free to give your thoughts or points of view in the comments. Just remember, be kind. As always, take care of yourself. Bless, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.